From Manila to the globe, this is World Newsfeed, bringing you the biggest stories shaping our times. Good morning, I'm Raine Musñgi. Let's dive into the headlines making a global impact. This just in, U.S. President Joe Biden has issued an official pardon for his son Hunter, who is facing sentencing for 2 criminal cases. In a statement, the president said his son had been singled out and called his cases a miscarriage of justice. Hunter pleaded guilty to tax charges earlier in September and found guilty of illegal drug use in possession of a gun in June, becoming the first child of a sitting president to be convicted of a crime. In other headlines, more than 300 people, including at least 20 civilians, have been killed so far as Russia carried out a series of airstrikes in Syria on Sunday. They're targeting rebels advancing after seizing Aleppo. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says warplanes also struck rural parts of Idlib and Hama, where the group leading the rebel offensive has recently taken control. Observers told Agence France-Presse the Syrian government has lost control of Aleppo for the first time since the country's civil war began. The surprise offensive by opposition forces, which began Wednesday, marks the most significant fighting in Syria's civil war in recent years. It has been led by the Islamist militant group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, as well as allied factions backed by Turkey. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad on Saturday vowed to defend Syria's stability and territorial integrity in the face of terrorists and their backers. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with al-Assad and said he was confident Assad's government will overcome the rebels as it has done in the past. In Lebanon, Israeli jets launched an airstrike over a southern border village Sunday, while troops shelled other border towns and villages still under Israeli control. The attacks come days after a U.S.-brokered ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah went into effect. There were no immediate reports of casualties. The Israeli military did not immediately comment on the strike in the village of Yarun, nor did the Hezbollah militant group. But caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati and the Lebanese military have accused Israel of violating the ceasefire agreement. The military said it had filed complaints, but no clear military action had been taken by Hezbollah in response. Israel says they were done to thwart possible Hezbollah attacks. Tel Aviv continues to call on displaced Lebanese not to return to dozens of southern villages in this current stage of the ceasefire and continues to impose a daily curfew for people moving across the Litani River. Hamas leaders held talks with Egyptian security officials on Sunday in a fresh push for a ceasefire in the Gaza war. The Hamas visit to Cairo was the first since the United States announced on Wednesday it would revive efforts in collaboration with Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza that would include a hostage deal. Hamas has insisted that any deal should conclude with Israel ending the war, while Israel says the war will end when Hamas no longer rules Gaza or poses a threat to Israelis. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said he thought the chances of a ceasefire and hostage deal in the Palestinian territory were now more likely. Meanwhile, fighting raged on in the enclave, and the head of the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency said it had to halt aid deliveries through one crossing a day after armed gangs inside Gaza seized food from a truck convoy. Kuwait's emir called for a ceasefire in Gaza on Sunday during the opening of the 45th session of the Gulf Cooperation Council in Kuwait. The council repeatedly affirmed its support for Lebanon during the conflict and called for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip.
We reaffirm our condemnation of the brutal Israeli occupation of the occupied land of Palestine and the ongoing genocide against our Palestinian brothers and sisters. We call upon the international community and the United Nations Security Council in particular to fulfill their roles in ensuring the implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions. We call for an immediate ceasefire, the provision of international protection for innocent civilians, the opening of safe passages, and the urgent delivery of humanitarian aid. We also reiterate our full support for all contributions from the GCC countries aimed at stabilizing the region, including the leadership of the Brotherly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in efforts to recognize the State of Palestine as part of the international coalition for implementing the two-state solution.
Well, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has chosen the father-in-law of another of his children to serve in his administration. Trump announced on his platform Truth Social that Lebanese-American businessman Massad Boulos would serve as senior advisor on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. Boulos, the father-in-law of Trump's daughter Tiffany, met repeatedly with Arab-American and Muslim leaders during the election campaign. On Saturday, Trump said that he had picked his son-in-law Jared Kushner's father, real estate mogul Charles Kushner, to serve as U.S. ambassador to France. In recent months, Boulos campaigned for Trump to drum up Lebanese and Arab-American support, even as the U.S. backed Israel's military campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Boulos has powerful roots in both countries. His father and grandfather were both figures in Lebanese politics, and his father-in-law was a key funder of the Free Patriotic Movement, a Christian party aligned with Hezbollah. In the next few minutes, our second major headline. Keep it here on World Newsfeed.
This is The Scorecard, where you score the latest sports news and in-depth views. I'm Anton Rojas.
Get ready. Be prepared. Get to the latest stories, updates, and reports about what's happening in the world of sports. Hosted by Anton Rojas.
The Scorecard, where sports is our business and business is our sport, right here.
The Scorecard on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.
Ciao, mabuhay. You are watching The Word Exposed.
Prepare our hearts as we dive deeper into our faith and receive the strength from God's Word. Join Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle as he shares the reflection we need for the rest of the week.
We pray that the Word of God would find fulfillment in your life and His blessings be always upon you.
Every Sunday, 7 a.m. with replays at 3 p.m. Bawat anggulo ng bawat issue.
9 out of 10 Filipinos ang nais na mapanagot ang mga corrupt officials.
Bawat detalye ng mga napapanahong pangyayari.
September 23 nang simulan ng Israel ang air attacks sa Lebanon.
Tuloy-tuloy na ihahati hanggang Sabado at Linggo. Weekend Agenda. Sabado at Linggo, 5:30 p.m. sa BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel. Your newest source of news and information.
That's it? Yes.
Follows you everywhere, every day.
Guys, wow.
Oh, man.
On cable and free TV. Online.
He joins us from the Batasan Commercial.
On mobile.
Simulan na natin ang agenda. No privacy.
This is BNC, and we are everywhere.
Welcome back. Protesters rallied in Georgia's capital for a fourth straight night on Sunday over government's decision to suspend talks on joining the European Union for 4 years. Thousands of pro-EU demonstrators faced off against police armed with tear gas and water cannon. Georgian media reported the protests in at least 8 cities and towns. Opposition TV channel Formula showed footage of people in Kashuri throwing eggs at the local Georgian Dream office and tearing down the party's flag. Georgian President Salome Zurabishvili had called the government illegitimate on Saturday and said she would not leave office when her term ends next month. That's as the Prime Minister said the state would not allow a revolution to take place. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze said the protesters had fallen victim to opposition lies, saying they have not suspended anything. He rejected new calls for new elections and confirmed that Georgia's ambassador to the U.S., David Zakaliani, is the latest senior diplomat to stand down after having come from pressure. Accused opponents to halt the EU accession of plotting a revolution, the country of 3.7 million people has seen months of rising tension between the ruling Georgian Dream Party and opponents who accuse it of pursuing increasingly authoritarian, anti-Western, and pro-Russian policies. The EU and United States are alarmed by what they see as Georgia's shift away from a pro-Western path and back toward Russia's orbit. Georgian Dream says it is acting to defend the country's sovereignty against outside interference.
Tomorrow, we will meet again. Alongside me will be the individuals I have invited, who will join me in leading this political process because I remain your president. There is no legitimate parliament, and therefore, an illegitimate parliament cannot elect a new president. Thus, no inauguration can take place, and my mandate continues until a legitimately elected parliament is formed, which can then legitimately elect my successor. But I am with you, and I will remain with you. I am so proud of you. I am proud of Georgia. A national accord has been reached on the most critical matter. No one can take away Georgia's independence. No one can return Georgia to Russia. And no one can deprive Georgia of its will and its European future.
I've been attending protests for quite a long time now, and quite frankly, it's been very tiring to see that our government does not hear what the people desire. I'm here for a very simple reason, to defend my European future and the democracy of my country. We've attended elections, it was clearly rigged, and we've done everything in our power so far to show that we desire a European future. So right now, we're going to defend ourselves, our country, our people, and most importantly, our future.
We don't want to be part of Russia. We want to be part of Europe, and we belong to Europe. And this is our very, very first demand, that we belong to Europe. We want to be part of Europe. We want to be part of development. We want to be part of sustainability, and we want to be part of the best life. That's why we are standing here. And we are risking our lives, we are risking our health, but it's worth.
Very simple reason. It's just the fact that my country deserves to be free from the Russian regime that has haunted us for many centuries. And I believe that we need to get into Europe. It's truly what we've wanted for many, many centuries.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden to help convince NATO members to invite Ukraine to join the alliance. That's as Ukraine's war with Russia enters an unpredictable new phase. Zelensky spoke to reporters in Kyiv alongside new president of the European Union's Council of Member States, Antonio Costa, who traveled to Ukraine on his first day in office to show support for Kyiv in its war with Russia. Kyiv wants NATO members to issue an invitation at an alliance meeting in Brussels this week as the invasion grinds towards its 3-year mark and Russia makes battlefield gains. Some NATO allies are still wary of inviting Ukraine to join the alliance, which obliges all members to aid each other if attacked. Asked whether the EU would step up funding if President-elect Donald Trump withdrew support, Costa told the Associated Press that the bloc would stand for Ukraine as long as necessary. Incoming U.S. President Trump has criticized the scale of U.S. support for Ukraine and has promised to end the war quickly without saying how.
There are no illusions. There are still the same skeptic countries, and the United States are part of them, unfortunately. I don't know whether the current President Biden will recommend this, but I do know to a certain extent the position of the Secretary of State Blinken. He's more positive. Still, there's Germany, there's Hungary, which is why only a consolidated signal could be perceived positively by all leaders.
We plan to provide for a full year, every month, 1.5 billion euros of assistance. This money comes from the proceeds of Russia's frozen assets and can also be used for military purposes.
Russian President Vladimir Putin approved budget plans Sunday, raising Moscow's 2025 military spending to record levels. As Russia seeks to prevail in the war in Ukraine, around 32.5% of the budget posted on the government website has been allocated for national defense, amounting to over $145 billion. This is increased from a reported 28.3% this year. Lawmakers in both houses of the Russian parliament, the State Duma and Federation Council, had already approved the plans in the past 10 days. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine since February 2022 is Europe's biggest conflict since World War II and has drained the resources of both sides. And while Kyiv has been getting billions of dollars in help from Western allies, Russian forces are bigger and better equipped, and in recent months, the Russian army has gradually been pushing Ukrainian troops backward in eastern areas. The United States is not considering the idea of returning to Ukraine the nuclear weapons it gave up after the Soviet Union collapsed. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan made his remarks when questioned about a New York Times article last month that said some unidentified Western officials had suggested that U.S. President Biden could give Ukraine the arms before he leaves office.
That is not under consideration. No. What we are doing is surging various conventional capacities to Ukraine so that they can effectively defend themselves and take the fight to the Russians, not nuclear capability.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised President-elect Donald Trump that Canada would toughen controls over the long undefended joint border. Canada's Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who sat at the head of the table with Trudeau and Trump, said the two men discussed additional security measures that Canada would introduce. He said Canada would continue to make the case that tariffs would damage both nations given how interconnected the two economies are. Trudeau flew to Florida on Friday to have dinner with Trump, who has promised to slap tariffs on Canadian imports unless Ottawa prevents migrants and drugs from crossing the frontier. Canada sends 75% of all goods and services exports to the U.S., and tariffs would hurt the economy.
We told the Americans, we said publicly, we're going to look to procure, for example, additional drones, additional police helicopters. We're going to redeploy personnel. As much as a reassurance exercise, we believe that the border is secure. We believe that there has been a long history of effective cooperation between Canada and the United States. We talked with the Americans about our concern about gun smuggling coming from the south towards the north. So these are all shared concerns that we agreed to continue to work on together. But it's important, I think, to show Canadians and the Americans that we're stepping up in a visible and muscular way, and that's exactly what we're going to do. It was a very cordial, warm dinner. As I say, the president at one point with his iPad was controlling the music. He was asking what people wanted to hear in terms of music. It was a very warm, cordial meeting, and I saw very much the mutual respect and warmth between the two leaders.
While the friendly nature of the dinner contrasts with previous exchanges between the two men, in 2022, Trump called Trudeau a far-left lunatic for requiring truck drivers crossing the border to be vaccinated against COVID. In June 2018, Trump walked out of a G7 summit in Quebec and blasted Trudeau for being very dishonest and weak. Meanwhile, countries negotiating a global treaty to curb plastic pollution failed to reach an agreement on Monday in the fifth and supposedly final UN Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, or INC5, meeting in Busan, South Korea. Countries could agree only to postpone key decisions and resume talks, dubbed INC 5.2, to a later date. The most divisive issues included capping plastic production, managing plastic products and chemicals of concern, and financing to help developed countries implement the treaty.
Dear colleagues, we have made significant progress in Busan in our collective effort to address plastic pollution, including its impact on the marine environment. However, our work is far from complete, and we must remain pragmatic as we continue collaborating toward our shared goal. I approach this task with high expectations and a strong determination to see it fulfilled.
More than 100 nations wanted to cap production of plastic, while a handful of oil producers were prepared only to target plastic waste. Plastic production is on track to triple by 2050, and microplastics have been found in the air, fresh produce, and even human breast milk. A 2023 UN Environment Program report found 3,200 chemicals to be of concern in plastics, with women and children particularly susceptible to their toxicity. Up next are updates on the weather, sports, and entertainment from around the globe. World Newsfeed will be right back. Stay on BNC.
Beauty, health, adventure. This is for you. Join Marie Lozano where she uncovers the untold stories and unexpected surprises in the world of lifestyle.
Where fashion meets art, few events recently capture this synergy. Let me tell you about the Lifestyle Lab.
The Lifestyle Lab on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel.
It has no authorization.
We hope and pray that it will not rise.
Thanks for having me here.
It's an orchestrated
By myself, basically.
We always say that.
It depends.
A well-concerted effort.
Perhaps I can reiterate. My greatest beefsteak. Iba na iba pala yun.
Welcome back to World Newsfeed. New York and several states in the U.S. experienced heavy snowstorms under a lake effect winter storm on Saturday. Parts of the U.S. Northeast faced near paralysis on Sunday as a fierce lake effect winter storm continued to dump heavy snow on cities such as Buffalo and Watertown in New York. The National Weather Service forecast that the storm would persist to the east of the Lake Erie through the remainder of the weekend, producing snow totals as high as 5 feet in some areas. The weather system has also brought temperatures to 10 to 15 degrees below average for this time of the year across much of the eastern U.S. Winter alerts were also raised for parts of Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York State during the weekend. According to the National Weather Service, lake effect snow occurs when cold air moves across the open waters of the Great Lakes, generating unusually heavy snowfall. In Greece, Storm Bora brought torrential rains that has caused flooding of homes, businesses, and roads in the popular tourist island of Rhodes on Sunday, forcing authorities to temporarily ban the use of vehicles. Reuters video shows cars and debris piled up, damaged homes, flooded streets, and residents trying to remove the mud from their properties in Ialios. One man died in a flash flood that hit another Greek island in the northern Aegean, and no injuries were reported. The fire service received more than 650 calls to pump water out of flooded buildings and evacuated 80 people to safer ground. Thunderstorms and heavy rain also interrupted train services in mainland Greece, especially in the center and north of the country. It is forecast that the bad weather will continue until today. Scientists said that Greece is becoming a hot spot for climate change because it has been buffeted by floods and wildfires in recent years. In sports news now, in the Qatar Grand Prix, Max Verstappen on top as the Red Bull racer triumphs. Verstappen was in a tight fight with McLaren's Lando Norris throughout the race until the Briton Norris was given a 10-second stop-and-go penalty for failing to slow for yellow flags. This latest win comes after Verstappen captured the world title in Las Vegas last month. And the biggest Thanksgiving weekend in the U.S. and Canadians' box office history, with Moana 2 debut combined with Wicked and Gladiator 2. Moana debuted with an estimated $368 million in global sales, thanks to the Thanksgiving period from Wednesday through Sunday. Moana 2 surpassed Frozen 2's holiday haul of $125 million in 2019. For all movies in theaters this weekend, the domestic total hit in the U.S. hit $420 million, smashing 218 Thanksgiving records of $315 million, led by Ralph Breaks the Internet and Creed 2. On the lighter side, Sunday marked the 4-week Advent countdown to Christmas for many Catholic nations, and in Chile, Walt Disney heroes Mickey Mouse, Buzz Lightyear, and Spider-Man kicked off this special season in the capital, Santiago. The annual Disney parade is a huge pull for children who line the streets for a glimpse of their favorite characters. Some grown-ups felt a bit overwhelmed by the size of the crowds at what is known as the Paris Parade, but said it was a great day out all the same. This year marks the 13th edition of the festivity, which paid tribute to the 4 elements of nature: fire, water, earth, and air.
I think it's great. It's a good event for the children so that they can learn and develop themselves. The only thing is that it's packed, but it's part of the show.
The truth is that every time more people come, the organization should be a bit better, but the kids enjoy it, and that's the most important thing.
And that's all for now. Thank you so much for joining us. Catch up with us again tomorrow at 10 when we bring you the world in 30 minutes, only on World Newsfeed. Follow the Money comes next. Keep it here on the Bilyonaryo News Channel, always on top.